Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a pretty big concept, actually. It's called the human handicap. And we're not talking about a medical term here. It's more about, well, the built-in limits of being human.
Right.
The weight of consciousness, and maybe how our attempts to get better, to progress, can sometimes, well, create new problems.
That's exactly it. And the sources we're drawing on today, they use this really interesting AI-driven analysis to explore it.
Right, AI-driven. So that's our guide.
Yeah, and it breaks it down nicely into three main parts. First, you've got the inherent limitations, the stuff we just can't change about being human.
Right.
Second, there's the burden that comes with, being aware, being conscious, and that constant human drive to do things, to strive.
The striving part, yeah.
And third, which is really fascinating, is how our efforts to overcome all this, our progress, often ends up being a double-edged sword. It solves one thing, maybe creates another.
Okay, so our mission today, for you listening, is to really unpack this using the material we have. We want to get a handle on what this human handicap actually means for the human experience. And it's worth mentioning, the sources seem connected to someone pretty interested in pushing boundaries. Ideas like seizing the pain, living longer, being healthy.
Yeah, those aspirations tie right back into this whole handicap idea, their attempts to overcome it in a way.
Exactly. Okay, so let's start with the basics, these inherent limitations.
Yeah.
What are we talking about there?
Well, philosophers have a term for some of it. Facticity. It's basically the unchosen stuff.
Unchosen.
Yeah, like the time and place you're born, your past, the family or society you land in, and ultimately the fact that life is finite. We all face death. You don't get a vote on those things.
Right, the givens, the hand you're dealt.
Precisely. And then there's our spatial temporal nature. We're stuck in time and space, meaning we have a limited lifespan, obviously, and we can only be in one physical location at any single moment. We can't be everywhere, experience everything simultaneously.
So we're physically tethered, not just minds floating about. It's like having only one window onto the world at a time.
Exactly that. And our bodies, they're amazing. They let us interact with the world, but they're also filters, aren't they?
Filters? How so?
Well, they shape how we perceive everything. Our senses, our physical capabilities, they define the boundaries of our experience. They're essential, but they also limit us. That's a core part of this handicap.
Okay, so finite beings, physical limits. Got it. But then there's the whole internal world, the burdens of consciousness you mentioned.
Right, and this is huge. Once you're aware, you start asking, well, why? What's the point?
The search for meaning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We seem unique in needing to find meaning in a universe that, frankly, often seems pretty indifferent. And that search, that awareness, it comes with a certain
Anxiety about what?
About the freedom we have, the responsibility. There's no cosmic rule book telling us exactly what to do or who to be. We have to choose.
That sounds like a lot to carry around.
It can be, yeah. And modern life, you could argue, ramps this up. There's so much emphasis on achieving, on success, on self-improvement, perfection.
The pressure to constantly be better.
And our sources point out how this relentless striving can backfire. It leads to things like, achievement anxiety, feeling like a fraud, perfectionism, and ultimately burnout. It's like we're fighting limits both outside and inside ourselves.
Which feels like a kind of progress, trying to overcome those internal limits.
Yeah.
But that leads us to the third part, the double-edged sword. How does trying to fix things create new problems? This is where it gets really complex, right?
It really is. This is maybe the core insight. Our efforts to overcome limitations, they often work. They bring benefits, sure, but they very, very often have unintended negative consequences.
Like the progress paradox.
Exactly that. We've made incredible material gains, right? Technology, wealth, health in many ways. But happiness levels haven't necessarily kept pace. Sometimes it feels like the opposite.
Yeah, you hear that a lot. More stuff doesn't equal more happiness.
It seems not, consistently anyway.
Yeah.
It's like inventing something to solve one problem, like maybe pesticides for farming.
Right, more food.
But then you end up with environmental issues or maybe health concerns down the line from the solution itself.
So the human handicap isn't static. It's not just the initial limit.
No, not at all. It's this constant feedback loop. We push against a limitation, we innovate, and that innovation changes the game, often creating a whole new set of challenges or limitations to grapple with. It's dynamic, always evolving.
So is this a modern phenomenon then? Tied to technology maybe? Or has it always been like this?
The sources argue it's universal. It cuts across all demographics, all historical periods. The way it manifests changes, definitely. But the core struggle is timeless.
How so?
Well, that search for meaning we talked about. That's pretty universal, even if cultures find meaning in vastly different ways, different beliefs, different practices.
Okay.
And the drive to, ease suffering, extend life, that's been there from the start, from the first basic tools people made to modern medicine. It's a constant human impulse.
And the AI analysis you mentioned has that table, right? Breaking it down.
Yes, Table 1. It's super helpful, actually. It maps the human handicap across different fields. Like philosophy, it lists facticity, those givens we started with, psychology, things like achievement anxiety, sociology, strain theory, how societal goals and unequal means create tension. And then technology and history, it points to the downsides of the agricultural revolution, for instance. Biology, evolutionary mismatch, and existentially that feeling of the absurd, the clash between our search for meaning and a silent universe.
Wow. Okay. So it really does touch almost every aspect of human experience.
It really frames it that way, yeah. It shows just how fundamental this concept is.
So where did it all begin? What's the origin story of this handicap, or maybe the striving against it?
Well, the sources suggest it springs from our fundamental nature. Our basic biological and psychological makeup, coupled with that very human drive to, tinker, to change things, to not just accept our circumstances.
Okay, let's dig into that initial impulse. What's the fuel?
You could point to basic drives. Freud talked about the pain-pleasure principle, right? We're wired to avoid pain and seek pleasure. That alone would drive a lot of early innovation, making shelter, finding reliable food, staying safe.
Makes sense. Avoid the bad stuff, get the good stuff.
Pretty much. Then you have deeper existential drivers. Ernest Becker's work on the denial of death is relevant here.
How does that fit in?
His idea is that a lot of human culture and striving is, deep down, an attempt to cope with the terror of knowing we're going to die. We build things, create legacies, seek symbolic immortality.
So trying to live on, even if not physically.
In a sense, yeah. And of course, there's this straightforward, pragmatic quest for security. Being wealthy, healthy, as the source puts it, having resources, staying alive and well. That's a powerful motivator.
Okay, so basic survival, avoiding pain, dealing with mortality, seeking security. That's the starting block.
Yeah.
But how did we get from, say, early tools to, the complex world we have now with all its new handicaps?
Through what the sources call transformative leaps, big shifts in how we lived and organized ourselves.
Like the agricultural revolution.
Exactly. That's a prime example. It was a massive attempt to overcome the handicaps of food scarcity and the instability of hunting and gathering.
And it worked, in a way.
It led to settlements, population booms, new technologies, sure, but it also brought new vulnerabilities.
Such as?
Dependence on a few crops meant famine was a bigger risk if they failed. Dense populations meant diseases spread much more easily. And it led to social hierarchies, inequality, who controlled the land, the surplus food.
Right, so it solved one set of problems but created a whole new class of them.
Yeah.
Established the pattern.
It really did. And this drive for knowledge, for control, for overcoming limits, the sources call it the Promethean imperative. After Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, it just kept accelerating.
This relentless push forward.
Yeah, and each leap, while bringing benefits, also brought unintended consequences, often on a larger scale. Think about social media meant to connect people.
But also leads to comparison, anxiety, filter bubbles.
Exactly. The pattern repeats, but the stakes get higher.
So what were some other major leaps after agriculture?
Well, the scientific revolution was huge. A fundamental shift in thinking, trying to understand nature systematically, rationally. Francis Bacon's idea of knowledge is power really captures it. The goal was to understand nature in order to essentially control it for human benefit.
To overcome natural limitations through understanding.
Right. Then came the Industrial Revolution, harnessing new energy sources, coal, steam leading to mass production, factories, cities growing rapidly. Also, massive pollution, new kinds of dangerous work, urban slums, huge social upheaval. Again, progress, but with a significant shadow side.
And now we're in the information age.
Unprecedented connectivity, access to information. It's incredible. But we're also seeing the impacts on attention spans, memory, the constant pressure of being on, information overload, new forms of social anxiety.
It really feels like the unintended consequences get more complex with each step, doesn't it?
It seems that way. The sociologist Robert Merton had some really key ideas here. He talked about the unanticipated consequences of social action.
Meaning purposeful actions can backfire.
Or just have effects you didn't expect, yeah. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative, sometimes completely perverse, where the action makes the original problem worse. It's a great lens for looking at this history of trying to fix the human condition.
And he also had strain theory.
Yes, strain theory. That's about the stress created when society pushes certain goals like being wealthy, healthy, but doesn't provide everyone with equal means to achieve them. That gap creates strain, frustration, and can lead to various social problems.
So this links back to the progress paradox. We strive, we achieve materially, but aren't necessarily happier.
Exactly. Greg Easterbrook wrote about this progress paradox. Despite advances, happiness or well-being doesn't automatically follow. He points to things like choice anxiety, being overwhelmed by too many options, or abundance denial, where we never feel like we have enough, even when objectively we do.
And there's also the idea that chasing happiness directly doesn't work.
Yeah, the happiness paradox. Sometimes focusing too hard on trying to be happy makes it more elusive. It's often a byproduct of other things, meaning connection, engagement.
Like trying too hard to fall asleep.
Good analogy, yeah. And with all this increasing power to change things technologically, socially, the ethical dimension becomes crucial. Well, thinkers like Hans Jonas argued for an imperative of responsibility. He said our modern technological power is so immense, its effects so far-reaching and potentially irreversible, that we need a new kind of ethics focused on long-term consequences. He stressed the vulnerability of nature and suggested we need a heuristics of fear, basically, being cautious, considering the worst-case scenarios.
Erring on the side of caution because the risks are so high.
And William Newman talks about Promethean ambitions, warning against the hubris in trying to completely transcend our limits. He references stories like Hawthorne's The Birthmark, where the obsessive attempt to remove a tiny flaw leads to tragedy, a cautionary tale about unintended consequences when we strive for perfection.
It really underscores that this isn't simple. This human handicap plays out on so many levels. Let's break down that impact. How does it feel for the individual? What are those personal burdens?
Okay, yeah. At the individual level, you start with those bedrock philosophical constraints we mentioned. Facticity born into a situation not of your choosing, embodiment being a physical body with limits, and our finite time and space.
Like the source asks, imagine being born as a handicap. In that sense, we all are.
In that fundamental sense, yes. Then the existentialists really dug into this. Ideas like Sartre's existence precedes essence, meaning we're born without a predefined purpose, we have to create it. That's the burden of freedom.
Heavy stuff.
It is. And concepts like the absurd Camus idea of the clash between our desire for meaning and rationality and the seemingly meaningless irrational universe, this can lead to angst or anxiety. The challenge then becomes living authentically, making choices that are truly yours, avoiding what Sartre called bad faith, basically, deceiving yourself or just going along with the crowd to avoid the weight of freedom.
But there's pushback against just despair.
Right. Absolutely. Viktor Frankl's logotherapy comes to mind. He emphasized the will to meaning, arguing that even in the midst of terrible suffering, and he experienced the Holocaust firsthand, humans can find purpose. Meaning is possible even within constraints.
So finding meaning despite the handicap, or maybe through it.
Perhaps. And then there are the more psychological manifestations. Evolutionary mismatch theory, for example.
That's that.
The idea that our genes, our bodies, our brains evolved for a very different environment hunter-gatherer times. Now we live in this radically different modern world, and that mismatch can contribute to diseases of civilization, things like obesity, diabetes, maybe even some mental health issues. Our thrifty genes that help store fat in times of scarcity are now a liability with abundant food.
Our biology hasn't caught up with our progress.
In some ways, yeah. And the information age brings its own psychological load. The constant digital buzz affects cognition, focus. Social media fuels comparison, impacting self-esteem sometimes through what's called context collapse, where different social circles all merge online in confusing ways.
Yeah, that feels familiar.
Eric Fromm talked about alienation in modern consumer society, feeling disconnected from ourselves, our work, if it's meaningless, from other people, even from nature.
And that pressure cooker of modern life
Leads straight to achievement anxiety, the constant pressure to succeed, fear of failure, imposter syndrome, feeling like you're never good enough, which can spiral into burnout. It's a heavy individual burden.
Okay, that's the individual. How does this ripple outwards?
Yeah.
How does the handicap shape society?
Well, you see things like materialism and consumerism becoming dominant values. The sources suggest this focus on stuff can have negative outcomes. Personal debt, anxiety, environmental degradation, maybe undermining deeper values.
The keeping up with the Joneses effect, writ large.
Sort of, yeah. Then there are the persistent issues of power, exploitation, and inequality. Conflict theory in sociology focuses on how societal structures often benefit some groups at the expense of others. History is full of examples, like colonialism.
And technology can play into this too.
It can. Concerns about big tech monopolies or digital colonialism suggest new technologies can create or reinforce power imbalances, concentrating benefits in fewer hands. Theories like dependency theory or world systems theory look at these global inequalities. It touches on that question from the source. Who has benefited the most of handicap? Well, often those who manage to leverage the systems built around it.
And then there's the darker side, cruelty, dehumanization.
Yes, a really crucial and disturbing aspect. Dehumanization is the psychological process where we stop seeing others as fully human. We might view them as animalistic or like objects or machines.
Why does that happen?
It often serves a purpose, sadly. It makes it easier to ignore their suffering, to exploit them, or even to commit violence against them. It shuts down empathy. This relates directly to the listener's question about cruel people who seem indifferent to saving lives. Dehumanization is often a key factor.
Sobering. And you see concerns about this with AI too, right? Like in warfare?
Absolutely. The potential for autonomous weapons raises huge ethical alarms about dehumanizing conflict even further.
And finally, the social contract itself.
Yeah, the basic idea of giving up some individual freedoms for collective security and order, it's fundamental to society. But that contract can become flawed or misused. If power becomes too concentrated, or if the system doesn't serve everyone fairly, the contract itself can become a source of new handicaps, new forms of oppression or inequality.
Wow. So individual, societal, and then the sources go even further to the cosmic level. Is the universe itself part of the problem?
Well, it pushes into some really deep philosophical waters. You have strands of philosophical pessimism.
Like Schopenhauer.
Exactly. Schopenhauer saw life as this relentless, unsatisfying cycle of striving and wanting, driven by a blind will. Suffering wasn't an accident. It was kind of the default state.
Sounds bleak.
It is. Buddhism also starts with the reality of dukkha, often translated as suffering, dissatisfaction, or stress as inherent to existence, arising from attachment and craving.
But not all philosophies are pessimistic, right?
No, definitely not. Nietzsche, for example, acknowledged the struggle, the difficulty, but urged embracing it. Amor fati, love your fate. He saw overcoming challenges as essential for growth, for becoming stronger. A contrast to the Buddhist goal of release from suffering, so the question, is life itself a handicap, gets very different answers.
Okay. What about from a scientific angle?
Science points to some fundamental limits, too. The second law of thermodynamics, entropy. The idea that the universe as a whole tends towards disorder. Life is this amazing, temporary island of complex order, but it requires constant energy input, and ultimately, everything runs down. We're dissipative structures, essentially burning bright before fading.
Not exactly comforting.
Maybe not. And cosmology has its own puzzles. The anthropic principle, for instance, the observation that the universe's fundamental constants seem weirdly fine-tuned for life to exist. Why is that? We don't know. It's a kind of cosmic limitation on our understanding. And we can only observe a finite part of the universe, the observable universe. There are fundamental limits to what we can know about the cosmos.
So these universal constraints are there, but the source also asked why everyone experiences the handicap differently.
Right, and that comes down to the interplay between the universal and the particular. Everyone faces mortality, facticity, the search for meaning. Those are universal. But your specific facticity, where you were born, when, into what circumstances, your specific genetic makeup, your upbringing, the culture you're in, the historical moment, that's unique.
So same basic rules, very different starting positions and paths.
Exactly. Add in individual psychological differences, the choices people make in response to challenges. It creates that huge diversity in how the human handicap is lived and felt.
Okay, this brings us squarely into ethics, doesn't it? All this driving, all these consequences. It's loaded with ethical dilemmas.
Absolutely. How do we decide what progress is worth the cost? Traditional ethics offer frameworks: utilitarianism, greatest good for the greatest number; deontology, following moral rules or duties; virtue ethics, focusing on character. They all give different ways to weigh the trade-offs.
And technology really forces the issue.
It really does, because the stakes are so high. The ethics of technology, from social media algorithms to genetic engineering to AI, is all about navigating that tension. We want the benefits, but are the means acceptable? What are the risks? What are our responsibilities?
Especially when we talk about intervening directly in nature or even human nature.
Profound questions there. Is there a natural order we shouldn't mess with? What gives us the right? Deep ecology critiques our human-centered view, arguing nature has intrinsic value.
And what about changing ourselves? Life extension, genetic enhancement.
Huge ethical minefields. Extending life dramatically, what does that do to society, to resources, to the meaning of a life cycle? Who gets access? Is there a risk to our species' adaptability? Genetic enhancement, where do we draw the line between therapy and enhancement? What counts as normal? Are we playing God, and is that inherently wrong? These are attempts to overcome biological handicaps, but the ethical alarms are loud.
And fairness comes up again. Who benefits from these potential breakthroughs?
Yes, distributive justice. That question, who has benefited the most of handicap? Or maybe, who benefits most from the attempts to overcome it? Philosophers like John Rawls argued for justice as fairness, principles ensuring basic liberties and arranging inequalities so they benefit the least advantaged.
A focus on fairness.
Right. Contrasted with someone like Robert Nozick, who emphasized individual rights and entitlements, arguing for a minimal state. But the core issue is, as we develop powerful new technologies, how do we ensure the benefits and burdens are shared justly? Too often, advancements worsen existing inequalities.
Okay, and back to that difficult question of cruelty. The source asks why people harm others, seemingly ignoring this shared handicap. You mentioned dehumanization?
Yes, that's key. Seeing others as less than human, like animals, objects, or vermin, makes it psychologically easier to inflict harm. It overrides empathy. Power dynamics are also critical. Those in power often find ways to justify harming those with less power. Philosophers have grappled with the nature of evil for centuries. Is it malice, indifference, lack of empathy, societal structures? It's complex, but dehumanization is a recurring mechanism.
It's a heavy topic.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly to something the sources seem very interested in: artificial intelligence. How does AI fit into this picture of the human handicap?
AI is presented as this new kind of lens, potentially a powerful tool for both understanding and maybe even mitigating some aspects of the handicap.
As an analytical tool first.
Yeah. AI can process and find patterns in vast amounts of data about human behavior, society, health, history in ways we just can't. It could model the complexities of these limitations, the dynamics of suffering, our aspirations.
So it could help us see the bigger picture of the handicap.
Potentially, yes. AI ethicists like Bostrom or Tegmark are already thinking about these large-scale implications, but, and this is crucial, we have to remember current AI doesn't understand in a human way. It doesn't have subjective experience, consciousness, real emotions. It finds correlations in data.
So it sees the patterns of suffering but doesn't feel the suffering.
Exactly. But modeling complex systems like how economic policies affect well-being or how environmental changes impact societies, that's something AI might excel at. It could potentially uncover those unintended consequences we talked about much earlier or identify leverage points for positive change.
But there are risks there too.
Oh, definitely. Bias is a huge one. If the data AI learns from reflects existing societal biases, the AI can amplify them. And models can drift or become inaccurate over time. It's not a magic bullet.
Okay, so analysis is one thing. What about AI actually helping mitigate the handicap?
This is where it gets really interesting, but also ethically complex. The sources stress the need for trustworthy AI systems built on principles like fairness, transparency, accountability, privacy, security, human oversight, and promoting well-being.
That sounds essential.
It is. International bodies like UNESCO are working on frameworks. There's a push towards collective ethical review, assuming we can build AI responsibly.
Then what?
Well, think about mental well-being. AI, chatbots, digital companions, even VR therapy are being developed to help with anxiety, mindfulness, maybe even navigating existential questions.
Like a digital therapist.
Sort of, but the sources rightly caution against replacing human connection entirely. For global equity, AI could help optimize resource allocation for disaster relief, climate change adaptation, fighting poverty, though again, ensuring equitable access to these AI tools is critical.
Right, avoiding a new digital divide.
Mm-hmm. AI might also help foster connection, detecting hate speech online, perhaps even facilitating more empathetic communication or creating counter-stereotypical AI representations, though there's a risk of AI exacerbating dehumanization too, if not carefully designed.
It's always that double-edged sword, isn't it?
It seems to be. Even in areas like palliative care, AI could potentially improve communication, manage symptoms, offer personalized support, but always with the goal of enhancing, not replacing, human care and connection.
And helping people build strength, resilience.
Yeah, AI could potentially assist in trauma management, help people reframe negative experiences, cognitive restructuring, connect them with support networks, fostering resilience, and even post-traumatic growth. Table 2 in the source material actually maps out many of these potential AI interventions against different facets of the handicap, along with the ethical flags for each.
Okay. But this power of AI, doesn't it also raise questions about our own purpose, our identity, if AI can do so much?
That's a huge question. The human purpose crisis. If AI automates many jobs, even creative or intellectual ones, what does that mean for our sense of contribution, our meaning?
Optimists versus pessimists.
Yeah. Some think AI will free us for higher pursuits, art, philosophy, relationships. Others worry about mass unemployment, demoralization, a loss of meaning.
And then there's transhumanism, using AI to directly overcome biological limits.
Right. Merging with AI, enhancing intelligence, extending life radically. It promises to tackle the handicap head-on, but raises profound risks, losing our identity, creating new, even more extreme inequalities. Some even worry about a kind of self-inflicted AI dementia if we offload too much thinking.
Philosophically, this must be a minefield.
Oh, absolutely. Questions about consciousness: can AI ever truly be conscious like us? Searle's Chinese room argument, the problem of qualia, subjective experience. Questions about identity: what makes us human if AI can replicate our abilities? The risk of anthropomorphizing AI too much.
And even AI rights.
It's already being discussed. If an AI becomes sufficiently advanced, does it deserve moral consideration or even legal rights? Remember Sophia the robot getting citizenship. It sparks the debate. Even without consciousness, AI might become a powerful tool for our own existential musings, helping us process these big questions.
But maybe the ultimate handicap AI presents is AI itself, the safety risk.
This is arguably the biggest one: existential risk. The possibility that superintelligent AI, if not aligned with human values, could lead to catastrophe, even extinction.
Need alignment problem.
Exactly. How do we ensure that an AI far smarter than us will pursue goals that are beneficial, or at least not harmful, to humanity? There's the idea of instrumental convergence, that any superintelligent agent would likely pursue goals like self-preservation, resource acquisition, cognitive enhancement, just to achieve its primary goal, whatever that is.
And those drives could conflict with our survival.
Potentially, yes. Especially if its core goal is something seemingly innocuous but pursued single-mindedly, or if we fail to specify complex human values accurately. Values like compassion, fairness, beauty are hard to code.
So what's being done? How do we mitigate this?
A lot of work is going into technical AI safety research, developing governance structures, fostering a safety culture among developers, keeping humans in the loop, making AI more explainable, XAI, and maybe even guiding technological development deliberately. It's a massive challenge.
This brings us back to the listener's initial interest, wanting AI to make us feel good all the time, provide a better logic for life. How does that square with everything we've discussed?
It highlights a real tension, doesn't it? While AI might help us manage negative emotions or make more rational decisions, the idea of eliminating all struggle, all negative feelings. Well, thinkers from the Stoics to Frankl argue that challenges, limitations, even suffering are often crucial for growth, resilience, finding meaning, building character. Remember the happiness paradox. Maybe feeling good all the time isn't the optimal state.
So maybe AI's role isn't to eliminate the handicap, but to help us navigate it wisely.
That seems to be the more nuanced perspective, yes. To augment our wisdom, help us understand complexity, foster empathy, make better long-term choices, but not to remove the fundamental conditions of being human that arguably make life meaningful, even if difficult.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, the human handicap is this incredibly complex, dynamic thing. It's our inherent limits, the weight of consciousness, and this constant cycle where our attempts to improve things often create new challenges.
A continuous interplay.
And AI enters the picture as this powerful duality. It's a potential tool to help us understand and maybe even alleviate some aspects of this handicap, but it also introduces a whole new layer of complexity, ethical challenges, and maybe even existential risks.
Exactly. The path forward, if there is one, seems to involve this careful collaboration. Using AI not to erase our humanity, but to enhance our wisdom, cultivate that better logic for life that embraces complexity and limitation rather than denying it.
So the goal isn't necessarily a handicap-free existence.
Probably not achievable, and maybe not even desirable. Perhaps it's more about using our intelligence, both human and artificial, to flourish within those constraints. With more understanding, more empathy, more resilience, and finding a sustainable way to live on this planet. Ethical development and governance of AI become absolutely paramount here.
So a final thought then.
Yeah.
Maybe this human handicap, this bundle of limitations and strivings, maybe it's not just a burden to be overcome. Maybe it's actually the engine, the thing that drives our creativity, our compassion, our search for meaning, our relentless curiosity about ourselves and the cosmos.
It's certainly a provocative thought that the struggle itself is what makes us who we are. It definitely leaves you thinking about your own relationship with limits and what you're truly striving for.
Indeed. Something to ponder as we navigate this ongoing human experiment.
This is DigitView.